Civil Rights, a movement to shape the future of minorities by me, Alicia Gibbs. So my paper was on the civil rights movement, and I also talked about Strange Fruit, um, sung by Billie Holiday. So we're going to start from the beginning. The civil rights movement was a journey to equality. Um, Understanding the rights that minorities had, which were very few, if any, and fighting for what they deserved. They did not have the same rights as their white counterparts. They were seen as inferior. They were not seen as equal. So there was a battle to get the same rights as every other citizen in the United States of America. There were four organizations that formed in the beginning. They set the tone of the civil rights movement. The NAACP, which was formed in 1909, that was the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. There was CORE, that was formed in 1942. That is the Congress of Racial Equality. There was SNCC, SNCC, that's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that was formed in 1960, and then SLCL, which is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that was formed in 1957. They played a major part in the civil rights movement. Segregation was not just segregation. There were a lot of battles and fights within the United States amongst the whites and the blacks and other minorities. Some of the things that blacks faced throughout the civil rights movements were lynchings, intimidation, beatings, deaths. And it could be just because they were black or because of accusations. Some of the methods that were used against them were different mask, harassment, threats, again, the lynchings, the beatings, their homes being burned, crosses being burned. The picture that I show here, this is a mask that was actually made by one of the wives of a Klans member. I personally took this picture. This is a mask that's on display at the History Museum in Raleigh, North Carolina, where they have a great whole section on the civil rights and what blacks went through during this time period. The way they started fighting back was with peaceful protests, sit-ins, marches, unity. They did not fight back with violence. They did everything they could to show their integrity and to show humanity, that they deserved equality. Throughout the civil rights, a lot of organizations were formed to help blacks. So to counteract that, whites had their own organizations to fight back, to keep things segregated. They had organizations like the KKK, the Aryan Brotherhood, American Nazi Party, and that's just to name a few. And again, they burned crosses. They would come and counteract peaceful protests with their own protests. One of the pictures you see, there's a bus with Klansmen, actually neo-Nazis, that would come and they would stand there wherever the blacks were. They would show up too, to show that they did not want to have integration. Segregation was not just for civilians. It was not limited to only civilian lives. It was also in the military. So the same members that would think that blacks were inferior, whites would think they were inferior, the same ones that would treat them like second-rate citizens also expected them to defend them and fight for them. So blacks did that. The downside, though, is that blacks did not have the opportunity to hold rank. Like in the Marines, you could not be an officer. It wasn't until 1948 when Truman integrated the armed forces. Before then, you had the colored battalions and units, but again, could not hold rank. They were always, their leaders were white officers. Their segregation was maybe, I wouldn't say worse, but they they couldn't do anything but be like in the Navy. They could be cooks, they could be stewards, but they couldn't fight. But there were lots of examples throughout time that would show them when their white counterparts were down and out, there were some that would step up to the plate and pick up that gun and fight for them and have their back, even though they were looked at as being inferior. There were boycotts on the buses. Whites could sit in the front, blacks would sit in the back. And if the white section was filled up and a white person got on the bus, then a black was expected to get up and give them their seat. They did not want to have their neighborhoods integrated. So they would put signs, let them know you're not welcome here. Even some of our government funded agencies, like our housing authority, they initially were set up to keep from blacks moving into predominantly white neighborhoods. There would be signs posted in different places, as you can see, cleaning up the streets one nigger at a time. And it didn't stop there. Again, they would, even if a black would move into the neighborhood, they would harass them, burn crosses, throw bombs into their houses. One of the big leaders that we all know is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was not the only leader. There were lots of leaders in the civil rights movement, but he was a really big impact in the civil rights movement. He did the nonviolent protests. He traveled around the country. He went to different cities and towns. He made his presence known, and he brought an entourage every time. One of his biggest influences and teachers was Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was the one that introduced him to the Gandhian method, the nonviolent method. And he also was the one that organized the march to Washington, D.C., where Dr. Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech. And that's what I have a picture in D.C. When he did the speech. Ways that they fought back, their way to stand up was by sitting in. Besides the marches and the protests, they would do sit-ins. So one of the famous sit-ins were by the Greensboro Four at Woolworths. It was 4 of them. They were from North Carolina A&T University. That was in Greensboro, North Carolina. And they went to the counter and they sat there. And they were not the first to do the sit-ins, but their sit-in brought so much media attention and notoriety that this became a big message. It spread throughout. And people started following suit. They kind of led by example. Again, they were not the first, but they were so determined and they continued, and it got so much attention because Woolworths was such a big store that was still segregated at the time that people followed suit. If they can do it, then we can too. It started with 4, then the next day it was 30, then the day after that it was like a few hundred, to where several thousand people came, and Woolworths eventually changed their segregation rules. James Lawson, another leader in the civil rights movement, was one of the people that would teach about the sit-ins. He was actually organizing students at Fisk University. Before he was able to get his sit-in done to actually do his demonstration, the Greensboro Four did it before him. But he was the one that was training a lot of these students, teaching them, we're not fighting back. No violence. When you show up, you're showing up in professional gear with a suit and a tie, and everything is going to happen. He was letting them know and getting them ready for things that were going to happen when they got there. People were going to hit them, be violent with them, spit on them. He actually went to India and he did study under the Gandhian method, which is what he was teaching his students. Another way that they did protest was the Freedom Rides, and that was down in the South. Now, Rosa Parks is a big face of the Freedom Rides, but she was not the first one to not give up her seat. But the NAACP felt as though she would be the perfect example because she was a hard worker. She was a part of the NAACP, and she was in the black section and didn't want to give up. I mean, she was tired. It was a long day, and she was just done. She no longer wanted to have to go through this unequal riding on the bus and having to give up her seat, and already the black section for a white person that got on when she was just working just as hard. It wasn't just blacks that participated in the Freedom Rides. We had white participants too, which is what I show a picture of here. They went to jail, but that was the best outcome is if you went to jail, because people got killed on these Freedom Rides. Buses were bombed. As I showed a picture here in Anniston, Alabama, 1961, there was a firebomb thrown on one of the Freedom Ride buses, and it was scary, but it didn't stop people. They continued on their Freedom Rides. They made sure that they were going and demonstrating, showing their resilience. Throughout the civil rights movement, there was a lot of propaganda that the civil rights leaders would use to try to get blacks to unify. And that was through music, that was through marches, that was meeting at the churches. So one of the big songs that I chose that has a lot of following to it was Strange Fruit. It was written by Abel Meeropol. He was actually, he wrote it as a poem, and Billie Holiday is the one that brought it to the masses. She was not the first one to actually sing the song. It was Laura Duncan who sung the song. Billie Holiday was born as Eleanor Fagan, but she changed her name. She took it after her father, Clarence Holiday, and one of her favorite actresses, Billy Dove. Abel Meeropol was inspired to write the song Strange Fruit by this picture. This is a picture of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in Marion, Indiana. They were accused of killing a factory worker and raping the companion. They were put in jail. The mob actually broke them out of jail with sledgehammers, drugged them to the center of town, and lynched them. To this day, they still don't know who actually committed the murder and the rape. But this was just the end all. Like, Abel Meeropol he was done. He was sick of seeing this kind of act happening to blacks across the South. Lynching was something that people could have barbecues to and bring their kids. Like, it was normal for whites to do that. And he was tired of seeing it. So, Strange Fruit may not have won many awards in the very beginning when she initially sang it, but over time, people had to recognize, you had no choice but to recognize that this is a big song that set a lot of the tone of what was going on during the civil rights movement. In 1999, Time magazine named it Best Song of the Century. 2002, the Library of Congress chose about 50 songs to put in their National Recording Registry. This was one of the songs they want to make sure was in there and was kept for all times. Atlanta Journal-Constitution named it as #1 on the 100 Songs of the South. It sold over 1 million copies. And people have gone and remade this song over and over. And one of the very interesting things that just happened recently with our new president being elected, they asked a lady named Rebecca to sing this, to come sing at his inauguration. She said the only way that she was going to sing was if she could sing Strange Fruit. So the lyrics to Strange Fruit I posted on here, and it does say Lewis Allen because Meeropol actually would go by Lewis Allen. But here's some of the songs by Billie Holiday.
Blood on the leaf and blood at the root. Black butter swinging in the sun on the breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar
So that's just a little clip of Strange Fruit. I hope you enjoyed my my presentation.